How's it going, everybody? This is Rusty here at FCP Euro. Today we're going to be going over the replacement of the oil filter housing on your 3-liter equipped Audi or Porsche vehicle. Today behind me we have a B9 Audi S5 that we're going to be doing the service on. So this DIY will pertain to a wide range of the 3-liter equipped vehicles across the Audi and Porsche platforms. Today we have a OEM unit here equipped with the torque to yield bolts with some new thread lock on the bolts already, as well as the O-rings you'll need to do the job. So if you found this video, you may be here because you have an oil leak coming down the sides of the engine, dripping down, took your belly pan down and not sure where it's coming from. It's quite visible from the top of the engine before you even get below the car to see around the outside of this that it may be sweating, collecting debris, and just generally leaking. When doing the oil service, when you're lifting the filter off, a lot of oil can drip down below. We do suggest to put a rag underneath that to keep the gasket underneath from collecting any oil and ruining the seal. And it's not always absolutely necessary to replace the entire housing. You are able to replace just the seal. However, today we will be going through the entire replacement of the housing assembly. In my experience, a lot of the failure in these oil filter housings is mainly from a sloppy oil service. When you're taking the oil filter cap off, a lot of times this is actually sitting at a little bit of an angle and that oil can drip down the housing and you will get a little bit of oil on the tab that sticks out from the housing that can wick into the seal, swell the seal, and deform the seal, as well as start to possibly crack the oil filter housing. So we'll be going ahead and replacing the entire assembly. And of course, everything you see here in front of me is available here at fcpeuro.com. And now that we've gone over the parts that you need to do the job, let's get into some of the tools. So we'll need a 13mm socket as well as a 32mm socket, a couple of different variations of a T30. We'll want a 3/8 torque wrench. And we'll need a couple of ratchets to drive those T30s, and you may find it useful to have a couple different ones on hand. You may find it useful to have a couple of magnets on hand. Magnet will definitely help pulling out some of those bolts before you take the housing out so that they don't fall into that hot V. You may find it useful also to have a 90-degree pick to take off some of the O-rings. We do suggest a vacuum to remove some dirt debris around that filter housing before you go take that off so that none of that falls into the engine. Air chuck in combination with an air compressor. We have a drill here which will help us make use of our time. A torque marker for finishing up some of the torque specs. All right, so now that we know what we're working with tools-wise, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. In order to access the oil filter housing, first step would be to remove the engine cover here. It is just a series of bungs or little rubber grommets that hold the engine cover on. Just got to pull up a little bit. To give yourself a little bit more room, we're going to go ahead and take off the heat shield above the turbo and the exhaust. On your car, you should have 4. We only have 3. That just comes right off. And then we have the evaporative emissions line that we're going to take off the charge air pipe here. It's just a couple of clips that you squeeze together. Careful not to break these, it is quite fragile. And then you can just leave this connected. It is rather difficult to get out down below. We're going to go ahead and remove it because there's a screw down here that someone else did not properly reinstall, making sure that it's the right screw and it's not stripped or anything like that. So after you've disconnected the line from the charge air pipe, we're going to go ahead and remove the rest of the pipe that leads into the turbocharger. It's a T30 screw that's screwed into the turbo. So we're going to go ahead and get that out and we'll be able to get the line out after that. And then just wiggle the line out of the turbo. You may have to just maneuver the pipe out as it's kind of bent around the back of the housing, and careful not to break any of the hard plastic on that back side of the line. This section is quite malleable, but this is pretty stiff, so don't break that section of it. And just tuck it out of the way, giving you access to the screws in the back of the oil filter housing. Once you get the evap line out of the way, next thing we're going to be doing is getting the wastegate actuator vacuum line off. Sometimes there can be a little bit of residual vacuum in from when the car is shut off, so it may have a little bit of resistance when you're taking yours off, but just work around the sides of it with a pick and then give it a good tug. Careful not to rip the rubber line there. And same thing with the other line, just tuck it out of the way. Next up, we're going to be removing the oil line that leads into the oil filter housing. Another T30 here on top of the turbocharger. You're definitely going to want a rag to make sure you don't get any oil on the turbo. And also if you have any plugs or caps or tape to keep anything from going into that turbo once you remove that. Once you've got the screw out of the way, get your rag, wiggle the pipe out. Try to get it underneath there. Careful not to drip all over your area here. And you'll notice there's some residual oil in the top of the turbo. Just clean off the oil line going to put a piece of tape around that so no debris gets in there while you're doing your service. Same thing on the turbo. I'm going to clean off some of the residual oil. And I'm just going to lay a rag over top to make sure nothing gets in there while I'm servicing. And then that will come out, and you'll be swapping this line back over to the new housing once you get the housing out of the engine bay. Before we start taking the oil filter housing out, this would be a good time, or before you start taking everything apart, to really clean the area, making sure that there's no dirt and debris that would fall into the oil filter housing once you remove it into the bore, into the engine. So if yours is a lot worse than ours and there's oil and dirt caked up around those edges, as you pull that out, it could fall into that. So in order to alleviate from that, definitely give it a good cleaning, some brake cleaner, engine degreaser, something of the sort before you get into the job. So before or after you do the evap lines, you can take the oil filter off before getting down to the hardware to relieve any oil that's residually sitting in the oil filter housing. So go ahead and put a rag down and around the oil filter housing to not make a mess. Let it drain down for a second before you go immediately pulling it out, as it's going to have a lot of oil in there once that seal breaks. And then you can just go ahead and put it back down, making sure to not get any debris in there while you're taking that out. So there's a series of screws holding this one down. We're going to start on the front of it. It's a T30, similar to all the other hardware that we've been removing. I would definitely suggest hand tools, as if you strip one of these, you're going to have a bad time trying to remove one. And again, there is some Loctite in there, so they will be rather tight upon braking. Make sure you're fairly seated. And again, this is where the brake clean comes in handy, cleaning the heads of the bolts. Make sure you get your bit really seated in there. Most of the bolts are accessible. However, there are 2 bolts directly under the turbocharger that are fairly difficult to get to. You may need to change a couple of tools and figure out what's going to work best for you. And you're going to want to go behind the wastegate actuator, kind of looking and moving some stuff at the same time to gain the best access. So for both of these more difficult bolts, in the front of the turbo, you'd be getting to the one next to the oil line, and then just behind the turbo, in front of the other oil line and next to the wastegate actuator, you're going to want to go down. So once you get the 2 more difficult bolts out of there, you can go ahead and zip these out with a drill or continue by hand, whatever you have access to. And before you remove that last one on the back, don't forget there is a bracket that's securing, so try to take them both out at the same time. That bracket mounting to the more difficult screw on the back corner with the wastegate, as well as the one here. And again, that vacuum line was not quite secured into that, so we may have to go through the routing of that to get a better idea what's going on there. And then we can go ahead and remove all the hardware. So same thing as the bolts in the back. Use your magnet and go down and take them all out. At this point, you may have a little bit of oil leaking down into the valley. We'll go ahead and clean that up after we're done. If yours is somewhat difficult to remove, you may have to rock it side to side, but ours has been fairly recently installed, being that it was an aftermarket unit. So you're going to want the oil line coming off the housing towards the front of the car. And as you can see here, we do have a ruptured gasket here. May have been from some oil getting on there or from installation. Could have been a pinched harness or something like that. We're going to go ahead and finish cleaning all this up and get the new one ready to go. So we've got the housing over at the bench. Just going to go ahead and take the one T30 out of the oil line here. Set that hardware aside. The oil line should be fairly easy to remove. You may need to turn it, wiggle it, or pry it out. Careful not to damage the line, as you are going to be reinstalling this into the new housing. And then just go ahead and clean the line the best you can. You may need a pick to go ahead and remove the O-ring. Don't be worried about damaging it, as we are going to be replacing that, matching it up to the correct O-ring, not to mixing it up with the new one or the old one, but set that off to the side and give the line another clean real quick, rolling that back over, making sure that you have no debris on there before reinstallation. And it couldn't hurt to have a little bit of oil on the line. Don't really want to use the old oil, but we've got some oil on that O-ring, twisting it into place, lining up the bore with the threads so you don't cross thread anything, and then go ahead and finger tighten that, making sure that nothing is cross-threaded upon installation. Once that's seated, make sure that the line is firmly in place before you go ahead and torque that down. All right, so we've got the line installed. We finger tightened the bolt just briefly, and now we're gonna go torque it down. Obviously not everyone's gonna have a torque wrench that's gonna go down to 9 Newton meters. Just know that it is getting tightened into a brass fitting that is pressed into a plastic housing, so be very careful. Don't over tighten it, but certainly don't under tighten it. If you want, you certainly could install this and have it bolted down with an extension and torquing it then. However, I really would like to just make a good mark while I have the housing out. That's why I'm torquing it on the bench. We're gonna go ahead and take the tape that we have from removal on the other end of the line and remove the other O-ring on the turbo end of the line. Again, same thing, clean up the little bore that the O-ring sits into. Don't be alarmed, the old O-ring may be black, it may be red. This one was a dark green, but the new one should be a nice clean green. And then again, put a little bit of oil on that before reinstalling, and grab yourself another piece of tape and put that back on there so you don't get anything in there onto the turbo. And now we're gonna go ahead, bring this back over to the car after cleaning up the oil filter housing area, reinstall this and putting the new bolts back in. Go ahead and remove any large debris that may be down there from somebody that has broken something or doing some previous repairs. Any large chunks, get them out of the way. We can vacuum those up later. Trying to keep a clean surface every time you go back down, not to put any dirt back down there. Wiping away from the center to keep all the dirt towards the outside. Before we go ahead and reinstall the oil filter housing, just remember that we have already replaced the O-ring on the bottom of the line, torqued the bolt, and making sure that the seal on the bottom is still installed. There are a couple of dowels in here, so if you do feel that once you're seated, you're wobbling a little bit, one of these dowels may not be installed into the specific pinhole. So again, we're gonna take it out the same way we put it back in, with the oil line facing the front of the car. Easiest way to get the bolts down into the oil filter housing themselves, attach it to a magnet. And then if you recall from the beginning, there was a bracket towards the back holding the vacuum line in place as well as part of the harness. Just install one of the bolts first. So I'm having a little bit of difficulty getting this bolt in here because of the vacuum line routing. And if you tune in for further DIYs, we will be going ahead and removing the turbo and getting some access to this in order to gain a little bit of slack on that line, putting it back into the proper position. All right, and just go around by hand, making sure that they're all snug down, kind of in a crosshatch pattern. We just finished with the one under the turbo, so we'll go up front, and then we'll go back over here, making sure it's pretty evenly secured by hand. And then the procedure will be 5 Newton meters and then 8 Newton meters, and then a final 90 degrees. So for the 8 Newton meter torque sequence, same crosshatch pattern, starting underneath the turbo behind the oil line. All right. So before you go ahead and do the 90, make sure that you get the T30 really securely installed into that bolt, as they are a little bit at an angle, so you want to make sure you get some pressure on the top of it so you don't strip it out. Otherwise you may have to redo this if you don't get that full 90 degrees on that bolt. And if you don't have the ability to torque with a 90-degree torque wrench, you're obviously able to kind of eyeball the torque and making sure that you get that final quarter of a circle on the bolt itself. So again, we're going to start behind the turbo. All right, so once you've got the housing torqued down and cleaned up the area, it's time to start reinstalling the turbo line, in which we've already replaced the O-ring on before reinstalling the housing. Refit the evap line, and then we also have one more O-ring to replace on the evap line before going back in. So we'll go ahead and undo the line here, and we'll get that O-ring replaced. Same thing we did with the oil O-rings. Get a pick under there, pinch it away. Luckily for me, my fingers are still covered in oil, so we'll just go ahead and lubricate it with the oil I have here. And then the same thing as before, you're going to want to kind of manipulate that back into place, making sure you don't cross up any of these wastegate lines or anything like that. Go down and around. You need to use a different hand. We're going into that location up there. And not only are you going to line up the bore in the turbocharger, you want to line up the fitting for where it holds it in place. And it's not going to be a very tight spot. The bolt itself is what's going to keep everything snug. It doesn't actually click in, if you will. It kind of just sits there until you reinstall the bolt. So be very careful not to drop this one. And spin it back into place. And then that one clicks in there. We'll go ahead and get a T30 and snug that one back up. It is rather difficult to get a torque wrench in here, but it's not sealing anything. It's not really absolutely necessary. Just snug it up. So that's been taken care of. That's in there. We're going to go ahead and pull the rag covering the turbo line, and we're going to put a little bit of oil on here as well, making sure that there's no debris surrounding that. Give it a little twist and sink it into place. Go ahead and put your wastegate line back on over that, and we'll grab the bolt for that. Just go ahead and sink that bolt into the turbo back down to hand tight, and then we're going to be doing about 9 Newton meters, similar to the other end of that line, which goes into the housing. Really not much. Again, if you don't have a torque wrench, you see I can just kind of torque it by finger. Do not over tighten those bolts. So there's no instruction to prime the filter, but obviously we've removed it. We've drained a lot of oil out of it. We have a brand new dry filter, and everything in here is pretty dry. So it's definitely a good idea to put, maybe a quarter of the depth of the filter housing of oil in there, just to kind of give it its best chance at startup. That should be more than enough. Go ahead and screw the filter back on. And I should note that when you do buy the oil filter assembly, it does come pre-torqued with the filter installed, the O-ring here. We just wanted to verify that for the context of this video. All right. So we're just going to go ahead, after we've cleaned it up, made sure the oil filter's in there, and ensured everything else is connected. We're going to start it up, make sure that there's no leaks around there before we go ahead and put that heat shield and the engine cover back on. So after we went in there and we spray cleaned a lot of stuff down, we had a little bit of oil splash up. You will have a little bit of smoking on the exhaust as the turbo and the catalytic converter start to warm up. Don't be alarmed. This is more than normal in doing this type of a job, but definitely pay close attention to it as the car is starting to warm up. Some of that's going to burn off. You don't want to be breathing that in, but we do want to pay close attention to the oil filter housing area, ensuring that none of this is leaking, making sure we don't have any oil pressure lights on the dash, and making sure we didn't pinch any of the harnesses around that area. It does look pretty good. We'll let this thing idle for a little bit, kind of burn this off before we go reinstalling all this. Letting the car sit for a little bit and shutting down, making sure it still retains oil pressure is definitely a good practice. All right, so after you've started up the car, made sure that there's no further leaks, cleaned everything off, you're ready to now reinstall the heat shield over the turbo as well as the engine cover. And luckily for us, we only have 3 of the bolts because someone either lost one or didn't tighten one up. So we will be getting that addressed. However, you should have 4. And then just position these, making sure these are still fitted in the engine cover. Position this back on here and line it up with the oil cap, and everything should fall into place. And there you have it. That is the oil filter housing replacement on the EA839 3-liter turbo Audi S5 and similar chassis as well. Thank you very much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to like, subscribe for more, as there'll be plenty more DIYs coming on this vehicle as well as many more. We'll catch you guys on the next one.